Firstly, I'd like to thank the organizers for inviting me here. I prepared a few slides to keep us all awake. But before I start with the text, I cannot refrain from taking advantage of my position here to comment on a few things that were said in the previous sessions. Regarding to what Alon Liel said, I must stress that as far as I'm concerned, apartheid is wrong, whether it is black or whether it is white, and dictatorship is wrong, whether it is military or whether it is civil. And I'm not willing to accept the fact that when the oppressed become oppressor, oppression is acceptable. I have to stress that. One more comment regarding to what was said here before. If Erdogan is the change, as Alon said, and if he is the glass ball we are to see the future, then the outcome of this spring is not so promising. As you can see, I'm less content with the changes we see than previous things we heard here. Regarding to what Umut Uzer said here, yes, Umut people are drinking alcohol in Istanbul now, but not when they want to sign a contract with a government official, and they pay much more taxes on the alcohol now, and it's rising, and there's a way and a reason to it. Regarding anti-Semitism, one must remember that Mein Kampf was a bestseller in Turkey, even during the honeymoon between Israel and Turkey. And now I'll go to the text. I'll be speaking about the perceptions of the Israeli media and the Israeli public of the changes in Turkey. In other words, I can call it how unprepared Israel was to what happened in Turkey. This is not an academic study, but a personal impression from a professional point of view. So, talking about Israeli perceptions about Turkey, I'd like to start with President Ezer Weizmann's visit to Istanbul in 1996. He visited President Suleiman Demirel at the time, and this was when Necmettin Erbakan took his position as prime minister, as head of the welfare party. Weizmann, Ezer Weizmann, a retired general, former chief of the Israeli Air Force and former minister of defense, was asked on the way back by journalists in his plane, he was asked about the Islamist prime minister of Turkey and what's going to happen. So Weizmann said that he knows Suleiman Demirel very well for many years. He won't let it happen. And on top of it, he said, that he assumes that the army will not stand still. The army will not let Turkey have an Islamist prime minister. Well, he was right at the time. I can start, I did start this presentation with this remark about 6 years before AKP first electoral victory, because this was for a long time the perception of the Israeli public, the Israeli establishment, and obviously the Israeli military, thus reflected by the Israeli media. There's a landlord in Turkey, and the landlord is the army. Since the end of the 20th century, the relationship between the two countries, you can see in these pictures, were perceived and analyzed through the military prism. The Turkish army was perceived here as the guardian of democracy, and this is not a slip of a tongue. People were talking about the army as the guardian of democracy, not secularism. And since the two militaries had such a good and close cooperation, this was an undoubtable bond. When the AKP won election in 2002, the Israeli media reported about the development, but did not treat it as an historical event or a game changer with regional and global implications. The general perception was they will be habituated by the generals, obviously, by the army, as Erbakan's government was before them. At the time, the developing Turkish Mediterranean Riviera has become a popular destination for the Israelis. Hundreds of thousands of Israelis have made it their preferred tourist destination, and Turkey, under the AKP, was branded all over Israel as the land of freedom, all included, made in Turkey. Romance, colors, flavors, escape, adrenaline, fresh air, whatever you want. No Islamism, nothing, no mosques, only fun and good time. At the time, this was how Israel was, how Turkey was perceived in here. This was the message that the Israelis were exposed to all over, in street signs, in the media, in advertisements, and in the journalistic report. This was what most of the mass media was reporting about Turkey. There were about 300,000 Israeli tourists visiting Turkey at the time. This is what they were looking for. The aim of those in charge was to reach 500,000 by the year 2007. Almost no one in Israel perceived Turkey as a country under the process of Islamization, even though the writing was on the wall, and there were some who did see it. This caricature was drawn in 2007. Very few media outlets in Israel dealt with the political and social processes in Turkey, and those who did, like Arad and to a certain extent your humble servant here, did it quite rarely. And I know from my own personal experience that when I published these views, I was very awkwardly looked at. I was criticized, and I was not taken seriously, not at all. In 2003, I was granted an interview with Prime Minister Recep Tayyip Erdogan. There were two headlines to this interview. Firstly, he praised the cooperation between the Mossad and the MIT regarding the investigation of the terror attacks in Istanbul of 2002. He thus wanted to reassure the Israelis that Turkey was a safe destination for them, and so he did. He offered his good services and offered to be a negotiator between Israel and its rivals, the Palestinians and the Syrians. This was the first time he stated it openly, and thus he added new dimension to the media coverage of the Israeli-Turkish relationship. Turkey became not only a land of long beaches and good time, but was perceived as a diplomatic player in the region, a legitimate one. By then, the media was concentrating not only on tourist attractions, but on the bilateral relationship between the Turkish government and the Israeli government. Erdogan, as one of the apps, visited Yad Vashem. Yes, there were some disputes before he came to Yad Vashem. Will he cover his head? Will he not cover his head? But eventually it was all sorted out. He did not cover his head. And he visited Yad Vashem. We all followed it. It was a very, very fruitful visit here. And Israeli dignitaries were visiting Turkey, such as Shimon Peres on this picture as president addressing the Turkish parliament in Ankara. We had also downs that were covered. This headline talks about direct confrontation between Erdogan and Sharon, Devlet terörü, state terrorism. He accused Israel of practicing state terrorism from day one, even before he was sworn as prime minister, but this was all right. No one paid real attention to it. When the mediation between Israel and Syria was revealed, the media paid lots of attention to this as well. On top of that, the media here covered avian flu outbreaks in Turkey. We covered AIDS outbreaks, economic and business achievements, and cultural developments. Very, very few words on Turkey's internal politics, internal problems, social developments. Very few words on the impact of the AKP on the formation of the new Turkish society. Again, some exceptions. Tzvi Bar-El, who will be here in the next session, did write in Haaretz some reportings about that. And from time to time, I tried to present the hidden agenda at the time. This was very, very unpopular and unaccepted. By the way, at the time, the goal was met. As you can see in this chart here, supplied to me by the Turkish Ministry of Tourism, when they had a representative in Israel. In 2007, more than 500,000 Israeli tourists reached Turkey. In 2008, even further than that. Then it dropped in 2009 after the Davos incident. What I brought you here is this Google Trend tool that I use from time to time to see what people are looking at. So you can see that in Israel, people did search quite a bit about Turkey. But again, they search about hotels in Turkey, clubs in Turkey, holiday in Turkey, Antalya in Turkey, no Islam in Turkey, no AKP. So, when all this has reached such a peak of interest of Israelis in Turkey, then came the Davos incident, which I tend to call it from one word missing to reach an agreement, as the Turks claim, to the 1-minute incident by Erdogan bashing President Peres at the time. The Israelis became suspicious. As you saw in the previous chart, the tourism dropped quite significantly, but they directed all their animosity towards Erdogan personally. Now the media starts to ask questions, but it is all directed against Recep Tayyip and not towards the vast socio-political changes that Turkey is undergoing, as you can see by this caricature that was published in Ma'ariv. Sort of the same time, Erdogan is trying to be accepted to all these extreme Islamists of the region, and he was accepted. He's going to Hollywood as an American Idol. But again, it's Erdogan, it's not Turkey. The Israeli establishment keeps its old guard perception that the army is still our pillar. Israel is waiting for the Turkish army to call Erdogan to order. Even after Foreign Minister Ahmed Davutoglu gives me an exclusive interview in which he criticizes Israel very harshly. This was after Davos, before the Mavi Marmara. He clearly said that there is no, and I'm quoting, there is no more strategic partnership between the two countries, and Israel should stop acting like a spoiled child. Netanyahu and Lieberman have to understand that Turkey will judge them by the way they perform, and they have got no more privileges. Even then, the military establishment in Israel is still expecting the Turkish army to act, to put things in order. The chief of staff praised himself for having a direct telephone line with his Turkish counterpart, and so did the commanders of the Air Force and the Navy. Even after the Mavi Marmara event, the chief of the Navy proudly declared in an open conversation with journalists that he has a direct contact with his Turkish counterpart. So I will not get into the details and analysis of the Mavi Marmara incident, but I think that even then the Israeli establishment was waiting for the army to fix it all up. This is why we were not really prepared for that. But I can conclude by saying that the Israeli media failed and is still failing to reflect the vast political and social changes that Turkey is undergoing in the last decade since AKP took over. I dare to assume, ladies and gentlemen, that if the Israeli media were to reflect these processes and discuss them in due time, and if the Israeli public would have been exposed to the dramatic changes that AKP brought upon Turkey, I tend to assume that the army here realized that something has changed in Turkey only when İlker Başbuğ was put behind bars. Only then they realized that something is wrong, that they were waiting for something to happen. So if they would have been perceived it before, all the tragedy, all the Mavi Marmara tragedy would have been taken a different course. Maybe the lost lives would have been spared and the dispute about apologies would have been eliminated. So this is a caricature that was published nearly a year ago, a bit more than a year ago, in Yom Kippur, in Yediot Achronot, and they see our Triumvirat walking to the synagogue for asking forgiveness, and we have Erdogan on the side. It won't hurt if you'll ask forgiveness from me too. Now, what will happen if Israel will apologize to Turkey? This is a different issue. I think that, well, let me go one step backwards. I'll sum it up by saying that as far as I can understand, Israel did not prepare for the changes in Turkey. Not in the military, not in the government, not in the foreign office. No Israeli establishment prepared for the changes in Turkey. It just struck us like lightning that something suddenly happened, even though the writing was on the wall. And now there is no work that is being properly done. What will happen if Israel apologizes to Turkey, and if it is worth it? I think it is worth it, but this is a different discourse. I've got one more paragraph and one more caricature that I want to show you. I thought I'd finish here, but things have happened, and I had another paragraph which I omitted and said that even now, as before, or maybe even more than before, Israeli media lost all interest in the trends, internal trends in Turkey. Even Erdogan bashing Israel, up until today, is no more breaking news. We'll see what language he will use this time. Maybe it will become breaking news again. We do not follow the state of journalism in Turkey. Women's rights and even Kurds uprising does not generate headlines here. What we do anticipate, what the Israeli media did follow quite closely, is the emerging conflict or border conflict between Turkey and Syria. And this is of high interest to us still, maybe because it helps us put things in perspective, trying to justify ourselves. And I'll finish with this caricature here. Erdogan paratrooping down on Assad and ask for apologies, compensation, and uplifting of the enclosure of Homs. Thank you so much.